just gonna briefly touch on this. I did see someone in chat mention they are a new socialist, and the whole Stalin song was a little bit worrying to them, which I can understand. So I just gonna briefly give you. I'm not gonna give you like the whole. I'm not gonna go into all the little details, but I will just mention that much like Kim Jong Un and Miguel Diaz Canel today, or Fidel Castro as well, Stalin had no power outside of like being a very influential ideological figure, like a guiding father. Now, in the military, of course, he was a commander of the military operation against Nazi Germany, but outside of that, he had no real say inside of the government. And in any bodies in the party that he even existed in, when it came to party matters, he had one vote the same as others. And in fact, many of like his progressive lines that he fought for were unfortunately not adopted. For example, USSR recognizing Israel was actually something that Stalin fought against. But unfortunately, there was a larger trend in the party that wanted to recognize it. Sadly. So, yeah, it's very important to understand that not only is I'm looking for this one article here. Not only is Stalin like not only is Stalin like in line with any other like communist leader that existed, in the sense that he did what the state asked him to do. He was a chairman who carried out the orders of the state, who carried out the orders of whatever happened to pass at the time, including for his own resignation. And so this is kind of the funniest part right here. I'm going to read you this short little article here, and this is Stalin's 4 attempts at resignation. And then I'm going to give you some sources in case you're interested in learning more, okay? So, Stalin's 4 attempts at resignation. Joseph Stalin was elected as General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU in April 1922, during the 11th Congress of the party. Between then until his death, he asked to be relieved of his duties as General Secretary a total of 4 times, all of which were rejected. On Lenin's motion, the plenum of the Central Committee on April 3rd, 1922, elected Stalin as the General Secretary of the Central Committee, a post at which he has remained ever since. That's right there on Lenin's motion, meaning Lenin was the first one to say we should vote Stalin. We should appoint Stalin as the General Secretary of the Central Committee. Lenin motioned that, and pretty much everybody agreed. Even Trotsky, actually. Even Trotsky agreed at this time that yes, indeed, Stalin should be the leader. Stalin's first attempt at resignation, likely in 1925, from the post of General Secretary was at a meeting of the Central Committee after the 13th Congress held in May 1924. This was rejected unanimously by all the delegations, including Trotsky. Stalin remarked on this later in the 1927 speech at a meeting of the Central Committee. And this is from his remarks. Quote, "It is said that in the will Comrade Lenin suggested to the Congress that in view of Stalin's rudeness, it should consider the question of putting another comrade in Stalin's place as General Secretary. That is quite true. Yes, comrades, I am rude to those who grossly and perfidiously wreck and split the party. I have never concealed this, and I do not conceal it now. Perhaps some mildness is needed in the treatment of splitters, but I am a bad hand at that. At the very first meeting of the plenum of the Central Committee, after the 13th Congress, I asked the plenum of the Central Committee to release me from my duties as General Secretary. The Congress itself discussed this question. It was discussed by each delegation separately, and all the delegations unanimously, including Trotsky, Kamenev, and Zionev, obliged Stalin to remain at his post. What could I do? Desert my post? This is not in my nature. I have never deserted any post, and I have no right to do so, for that would be desertion. As I have already said before, I am not a free agent, and when the party imposes an obligation upon me, I must obey. A year later, I again put in a request to the plenum to release me, but I was again obliged to remain at my post. What else could I do? Unquote. The next two attempts to resign from the post of General Secretary was a year after, in 1926, and later in 1927. The British historian Robert Service, who specialized in Russian history, wrote about this in his biography of Stalin. On the 27th of December, 1926, he wrote to Sovnarkom, Chairman Alexei Rukov, saying, quote, I ask you to release me from the post of General Secretary, Central Committee General Secretary. I affirm that I can no longer work at this post, that I am in no condition to work at this post. He made a similar attempt at resignation on the 19th of December, 1927. All three of these previous attempts were rejected. The last attempt to resign was in 1952, about 5 months before Stalin's death, during a meeting of the Central Committee, where he urged the Central Committee to relieve him of his duties. This, too, was rejected. In a speech given by him to the Central Committee that mainly criticized Molotov for some of his decisions, he was interrupted near the end of the speech by someone on the floor. Voice from the floor shouts, "We need to elect Comrade Stalin as the General Secretary of the CPSU and Chairman of the Council of Ministries of the USSR. And Stalin replies, "No, I'm asking that you relieve me of these two posts." Malenkov, coming to the tribune, "Comrades, we should all unanimously ask Comrade Stalin, our leader and our teacher, to be again the General Secretary of the CPSU. And so he remained at that post until he died. So you can see that Stalin couldn't even resign when he wanted to, right? Because again, like anybody who worked in party life, and Stalin in particular, he had come to love the party. And when you love the party, you know that you have to act as the party. As a communist, your duty is to carry out the party program. And therefore, if the party gives him a line, gives him a job, gives him a task, he must carry out that task. That's what chairman means. He wasn't a dictator. He couldn't make any decisions. Even in the party, when it came to ideological writings and ideological guidance, all he could do was give one vote. But in the state, in the government itself, he wasn't even in the government. He wasn't in the executive, and he wasn't in the legislature. So the idea of Stalin being a dictator is so overblown. It's nonsense. He has less power than like a fucking senator does in the United States right now. To say nothing of like the US president. Yeah, he was the definition of suffering from success. Yeah. There is something very funny about this. Stalin being like, "I will not abandon my post, but please let me go," and everybody cheering for him to stay like Gurley could not catch a break. Nope. And I mean the interesting part too though, come here, is like the fact that last time was somebody from the floor that egged on the rest of the people, and almost like the party then knew that they had to go along with this popular sentiment coming from the floor, even though large sections of the party leadership by that point were likely hostile to Stalin, and in fact had gone against many things that he had put forward and they voted against many times in his later years, right? So it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, he did had so some say, and I'll just say that I'm gonna allow this because I know what you're trying to relate. We're just trying to use alternative language whenever we can that makes the chat more comfortable. Nothing against you personally. It's just for the comfort of chat. But yeah, it's not that he had no say, but it's that he was a part of a collective decision-making body in the party, right? Just like that's the way, just like it was under Lenin. Everybody in the party and everybody in any organ of the state and the party itself, they have one vote on matters, and the majority vote has to be accepted by all. That's the way socialism works. And the reason it works like that is so that you never have this one person that can make a mistake, right? You always have this layer of accountability and this layer of responsibility. Now, if you want to learn more about Stalin, I'm going to give you some suggestions. If you were looking to learn more about Stalin and like further unpack the bullshit, I will point out two things. Almost all of the lies, the dual Hitler theory, all of the lies that you hear about Stalin, the stuff that predates the dual Hitler theory comes from Trotsky, who was an opportunist, who had no original theory of his own, could barely disseminate Leninism, and was therefore, I have to guess, some like jealous or whatever of Stalin. And so Trotsky, in many ways, started this campaign of demonizing Stalin as a way to delegitimize Stalin and legitimate himself. Despite the fact that even in Lenin's time, Lenin considered Trotsky to be an opportunist without any new ideas. As in this quote Strin just posted here shows. Comrade Trotsky's theses have landed him in a mess. That part of them which is correct is not new, and what is more turns against him. And that which is new is all wrong. Now, the second source of the anti-Stalin lies comes from Khrushchev giving a secret speech. And almost everything that Khrushchev said in that secret speech was lies that came from literal gobbles. Literally. And then these same lies are picked up by like Robert Conquest and others and repeated ad nauseum as if it's fact. Like the millions in the gulag, the forced starvation, so on and so forth. So you have these two sources. And Trotsky feeds into that later source, by the way. Trotsky's lies about Stalin directly feeds into then the Khrushchevite lies about Stalin, and also the ones that come from literal gobbles. And the way they get from gobbles to the West is through the Hearst press, interestingly enough. So it's first Goebbels who is making a lot of propaganda saying the Soviets are murdering all these people, Stalin's doing this, Stalin's a dictator doing all this, blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? And the Hearst Press picks this up and starts publishing it as well. And then after Hearst Press picks it up, it gets published widely in the US. And that's the start of it. And ever since, historians have basically parroted Robert Conquest. And even after the Soviet archives have opened, like, people will just parrot Robert Conquest and ignore the Soviet archives. Now, you do have some that are anti-Stalin and do have to admit that the Soviet archives do prove a lot of things that they thought were a different case before. So even in bourgeois scholarship, you can see, since the opening of the archives, they've had to go, okay, well, this wasn't a purposeful famine, or whatever, right? So there has been backtracking since the opening of Soviet archives, but most of them still just parrot Robert Conquest. Yeah, Hannah Arendt, there's Anne Applebaum is another one that just parrots Robert Conquest. Won't even consider what the Soviet archives have said since they've been opened. And so what I recommend, or a good book to learn about all of this in more depth, is Domenico Lacerda's Stalin, History and Critique of a Black Legend. You can get a free PDF for it right here. So if you go to this website, you can get a free copy of it here.
I would have been friends with Stalin.
Or alternatively, if you prefer to have me read it to you, I also did read the book as well. So if you go to my playlists, and you go to this right here, this is Stalin, History and Critique of a Black Legend, Maybe you want to listen to me read it while you're looking at it. I don't know. Maybe this will serve you in some way, but this is a playlist of me reading that same book. So you can read it. You can also listen to Larry talk about it while you read it if you want. So there, that's my e-reading of it, and that one I would recommend. That's a good place to start, right there, learning about that. And then after that, then maybe go to Grover Furr's website and have fun on there. Is what I would say after that. From there, go to Grover Furr's website, which you can find right here. And if you ever need any more Stalin information, you just let me know, and I'll provide you with whatever information I can. You'll find that this book is really good, though. This one gives you his anti-Israel quotes and his anti-Zionism quotes and everything to show how he was combating Zionism. He was against like a recognition of Israel, as he thought Jewish people were liberated in the USSR. Why would there be a need for Israel, which is really stealing other people's lands? So yeah, there you go. Those are my sources for you. That's my brief debunking Stalin. Yeah, Chimera, his other works are really good too. Western Marxism is a really good book, which really gives, I guess, Gabriel Rockhill the introduction to then get into the paid pipers of who paid the pipers of Western Marxism, is what, because he translated that book by Domenico Lacerda, and then he did his own examination of the paid pipers of Western Marxism. So yeah, those two books are really good as well. Who paid the it's called Western Marxism, or I can't think of what it's called, but it's something Western Marxism, the Domenico Lacerda one, and then Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism by Gabriel Rockhill. And I think the former is actually translated by Gabriel Rockhill, or Gabriel Rockhill organized the translation. Yeah, Rockhill and Lacerda, essential readings, absolutely. I went to Hearst Castle as a kid, and I thought the pools were beautiful, and the house, yeah. Funny how Khrushchev was spewing his BS, and then thanks to his Virgin Lands campaign and stopping Stalin's afforestation policy, the USSR underwent another food shortage famine. Like, I have such personal beef with Bro, I will never get over his betrayal. And this is why people who say that, like, who try to portray, like, what Deng Xiaoping did is something similar to Khrushchev, I find so deeply insulting, right? You can't compare the two. The reform in China was part of the revolution. The reforms that Khrushchev carried out actually undermined the socialist gains. There's a complete difference, right? Yeah, okay, so the reason why you get that Stalin pro-Israel front, there's a couple reasons for that, right? First of all, the attributing of Stalin as a dictator to the USSR, and therefore anything the USSR did was Stalin's decision himself. So again, even though Stalin fought against that recognition idea in the party, the majority trend wanted to recognize it. And so that's misattributed to Stalin, even though he was against it. Um, so that's the first reason. The other reason is because of the unfortunate, purposeful conflation of Judaism and Zionism that Israel itself is responsible for, I will say. But because of that unfortunate conflation, a lot of Israeli scholars and a lot of Israeli scholars have said, we dislike Stalin for this and that reason. A lot of them have even pushed back against anti-Stalin propaganda and said Stalin did a lot for Jewish people. So some of the propaganda comes from Stalin, in his rhetoric battles, in his guidance, in what he did in the party fighting against anti-Semitism, that then gets, of course, championed by Zionists, right? And then so this, because there's a Zionist championing Stalin, you get you get, I guess, unprincipled Marxists or Marxists who aren't looking into the context of it, saying, oh, well, if this Zionist is praising Stalin, clearly Stalin's a Zionist, right? When that's not the case. Really, what's happening is Stalin was against anti Semitism, and Israel tries to conflate Zionism with Judaism. And so, therefore, Stalin's campaign, Stalin being militantly against anti Semitism, is celebrated by Zionists. Rightfully championed by them, but championed by the worst people.